What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So this is a video out of all of the combined 50 videos I'm going to do in these top 10 listings. All right, this is the one that I did not look forward to at all. Okay, I look forward to this one the least. I've been hesitating and holding it off because I know that a lot of people are not going to agree with my stance on this one. Just do a brief recap. At number 10, Patrick Ewing. Number 9, Artis Gilmore. At number 8, George Mikan. Number 7, the Admiral, Darren Robinson. Number 6, Moses Malone. Number 5, I have Bill Russell. Bill Russell, of course, last time when I did this listing, I had him at number 4. So, Bill Russell is one of those guys, he's probably the most underrated as well as the most overrated figure in NBA history. Um, there are some people that underrate him. I've seen some people say, well, in today's NBA, or in modern NBA, he'd be no better than Alonzo Mourning. Matter of fact, I say, no, Mourning's better than him because Mourning could score over 20 points a game. They say, well, he'll be Tyson Chandler. And when you start saying things like that, okay, now I'm starting to see the disrespect there. Okay? First of all, Bill Russell did have some skill set. Okay? He was an incredible defensive player. He was a very versatile defensive player. He could, in his prime, he could literally guard all 5 positions. This is an Olympian, or would have been an Olympian. He was a high jumper. He's a guy that could run a 4-3. Okay, 6'9", two, about 220 when he first came in the league. Ultimately, he bulked up to about 235, 240. We've seen the footage of him jumping over a player back in his earlier days of the Boston Celtics in the fast break on the NBA. I think it came from Wilt Chamberlain. Was it Wilt Chamberlain Archive that put that up there? Shout out to that channel on YouTube. So this is a man that was a much more athletic specimen, gifted athletic specimen than Tyson Chandler. Um, One of the great rebounders in the history of the game. Second all time in total rebounds, 21,620 rebounds. And second in rebounds per game, regular season, 22.5 rebounds per game. But when you look at playoffs, he's the all-time leader in total rebounds with I think over 4,100 total rebounds. And his career average, I think, as far as playoffs, is like 24.5 rebounds. So he was even more dominant in the playoffs. He's one of only 2 players, other one being Wilt Chamberlain, to grab 50 rebounds in an actual game. But Russell grabbed 51 rebounds one time in a game. Even though a lot of people say Dennis Rodman is the GOAT rebounder from looking at numbers, think about Dennis Rodman, though. He didn't always carry that over into the postseason. But Russell and Wilt Chamberlain did. Bill Russell, for his era, especially if you look at his era, was a tremendous passing big man. Okay? As a matter of fact, I was just having a conversation the other day with someone in that even though their roles are not the same, there's some similarities a little bit in skill set with Draymond Green and Bill Russell. Bill Russell's a much better player than him. Don't get twisted. More dominant. But they're both great passing big men who have high basketball IQs. Draymond, however, doesn't have the quickness or the size or the rebounding ability, you know what I'm saying, of a Bill Russell, and he's versatile, but he's not as versatile as Bill Russell. I guess you could say he's a better shooter, uh, Draymond, but that's not saying much. Um, so look, these are some of the things that I think people get twisted with Bill Russell when they're always underrating him. And he was essential for those championships. Without him, they wouldn't have won any of those titles. Let's make that perfectly clear. However, this is where he's overrated. When people always emphasize those championships. At the end of the day, if it wasn't for the perimeter play of the Boston Celtics, they would have won none of those titles. Okay, I believe the Boston Celtics played Wilt Chamberlain's teams, whether it's the Sixers, the Warriors, or the Lakers. I believe they played 4 times in a game seven. 4 game 7s against each other. I think the combined differential in all those games put together is only 9 points, meaning that the Celtics only beat a Russell-led team with all of that fucking help, with all of those great All-Stars and Hall of Famers around Bill Russell. They still only won by a margin of 2 points a game. It went down to the wire, and usually the player that made the biggest difference in those games was not Bill Russell, but it was Sam Jones, who happened to go for his career something like 8 for 8 in clutch situations in the playoffs. Without Sam Jones offensively, without John Havlicek's help offensively and defensively, Bill may only have gone maybe 4-8, or 4-7, 3-8, and we'd be looking at him a totally different way if it wasn't for all of the help that he got offensively. Because let's think about this for a second. I once seen when I was looking at Nobody Touches Jordan, right? He was talking about how Sam Jones outscored Wilt Chamberlain. Well, look, um, Wilt Chamberlain had to contend not only with the defense of Bill Russell, but if you look at footage, there was a lot of help defense against him as well. So it was always like a triage or a double or often a triage of defenders swarming around Bill Russell. Wilt Chamberlain, excuse me. Yeah, he was still able to average. I know it sounds like I'm putting Bill Russell on trial, but I'm trying to justify my ranking here. But he was still able to average 29 and 29 against him, 29 points and 29 rebounds against Bill Russell. Russell was able to average 14 and 23, but Russell only shot 37% from the floor against uh, Wilt Chamberlain, while Chamberlain was able to shoot about 50%, which was higher than league average. But he was going against the GOAT defender. You feel me? Uh, but who was guarding Sam Jones on these teams? That would be either Jerry West or say maybe Chet Walker or Hal Greer or Paul slow ass Arizin by that time. I mean, come on. You got to look a little deeper than just saying that Bill Russell dominated Wilt Chamberlain. And the few times that he did dominate in the finals, Bill Russell, he usually did it against the Lakers. Why? Because the Lakers, as great as they were with Elgin Baylor, Jerry West, and Rudy LaRusso, the weak point of that team was their center. So those are the series where Wilt would drop 30 points, 30 rebounds in a game, or average 20 points, 25 rebounds, and 5 assists, because they had no real center. But whenever he was matched up against, say, Wilt Chamberlain, that's when you saw a series where he might have shot 35% from the floor, 48% from the foul line, 33% from the floor, only averaged 9 points, you know, 15 rebounds, which is kind of low for that era. Wilt might get average 33 rebounds. All these things, but the reason the difference is because Bill Sharman's going off, Bob Cousy's having a hell of a series, Sam Jones is shooting light out, and it's all setting Wilt's dominance down low against Bill Russell. And last but not least, let's not forget about how the series were matched up back then. In today's NBA, in the modern day NBA, the 94 Knicks had to go through a grueling 25 game playoff schedule. The 2007, no, excuse me, the 2008 Boston Celtics had to play 26 playoff games. 26. Went 7 games in the first round against the Hawks, went 7 games in the second round against the Cavaliers, went 6 games in the conference against the Pistons, and went 6 games against the Lakers. Do you know the most games Bill Russell ever had to play in a playoff series? I mean, as far as when I say series, I mean a playoff run, I should say. 14. And that was towards the end of his career. There were many times when Boston had a bye in the first round, the way the rules were. You read up on it. They had a bye, or it was a uh, one game playoff type thing, or a best of three. They had fewer rounds then. It wasn't the rule. It wasn't the ruling, schedule. It wasn't the grind that players of today go through when they go through a best of five first round, or after 2002, I think was a best of seven. It's not the same anymore. And while you can say fewer teams means you're playing against the best more often, that's very true. But when you have a super team like Boston did, and there are only 8 to 10 teams, and you're only going up against what, 4 teams in the playoffs? I mean, come on, it's kind of easy. So I just wanted to say all of that as to why I have him at number 5. And last but not least, yesterday was Bill Russell's birthday. Happy 87th birthday to the legendary Bill Russell. Now, of course, Bill Russell was born in 1934 in Louisiana. And Bill Russell, of course, growing up in that era, growing up then, you dealt with a lot of racism. A lot of racism. When Bill Russell, because of this, and because his father wanted more economic opportunities, when Russell was, I think, 8 years old or 9 years old or something like that, his family moved to California. Now, tragedy struck Bill Russell when he was younger, when his mother died at the age of 12. After this devastating blow to Bill, his father, who was working as a trucker, became a steel worker to be closer to his family. Now, at this time, Bill Russell was starting to fall in love with the game of basketball. And at this time, his hero, or the guy that he looked up to in basketball, was Big George Mikan. I'm imagining at that time that's when he was playing. Uh, you know, that'll be like the late 40s, I guess. And earlier on, Bill Russell was a great athlete, but he was not a great basketball player. Okay, um, he was never really good at shooting. He had very large hands, and one thing you know about players who have large hands is that generally speaking, they aren't really good shooters. When you look at Wilt Chamberlain, when you look at, or very strong, Wilt Chamberlain, look at Bill Russell, you look at a Shaq, of course. They're not really good foul shooters. Um, Wilt Chamberlain, excuse me, Bill Russell was cut from his junior high school team because he just really couldn't figure out the game of basketball very well. Okay, and as a freshman in high school in Oakland, California, Bill Russell was almost cut again. However, his coach at the time saw Bill Russell's athletic potential and encouraged Bill to focus on the fundamentals of basketball rather than trying to focus on offense, trying to be a great post. Just focus on the fundamentals of basketball. Now, at this time, Bill Russell worked very hard. He worked very, very hard on getting down the fundamentals. Plus, he had a growth spurt that helped him out. And by the time he reached his junior year in high school, this is when all of the hard work and dedication paid off, winning back-to-back high school state championships in his junior and senior year. It was at this time that he was mastering the art of playing defense and blocking shots. He studied timing, blocking shots, and he also began to master at this time the art of blocking shots and directing or tapping into the direction of his opponent. Interestingly enough, future baseball Hall of Famer Frank Robinson was one of Bill Russell's high school basketball teammates. So Russell was ignored by college recruiters and received very few offers until recruiter Howard Julio from the University of San Francisco watched him play in a high school game. The Julio was unimpressed by Russell's meager scoring and atrocious fundamentals, but sensed that the young center had an extraordinary instinct for the game, especially in the clutch. When the Julio offered Russell a scholarship, he eagerly accepted. Bill Russell realized at this realized at this moment that basketball was his chance, his escape from what plagued young black men at that time, black people in general, extreme poverty and racism. At USF, Russell became the new starting center for Coach Phil Woolpert. Coach Woolpert emphasized defense and deliberate half-court play, which favored Russell's exceptional defensive skills. In 1954, Woolpert became the first coach of a major college basketball squad to start three black players: Bill Russell, Casey Jones, and Hal Perry. In his UFC years, Russell took advantage of his relative lack of bulk to develop a unique defensive style. Instead of purely guarding the opposing center, he used his quickness and speed to play help defense against opposing forwards and aggressively challenging their shots. Combining the stature of shot blocking skills of a center with the foot speed of a guard, Russell became the centerpiece of the USF team that soon became a force in college basketball. After USF kept Holy Cross star Tom Heinsohn scoreless an entire half, Sports Illustrated wrote that if Russell ever learns to hit the basket, they're going to have to rewrite the rules. Besides basketball, Russell represented USF in track and field events. Russell was a standout in the high jump, ranking the seventh best high jumper in the world in 1956, according to Track and Field News. That year, Russell won high jump titles at the Central California AAU meet, Pacific AAU meet, and the West Coast Relays. One of his highest jumps occurred at the West Coast Relays, where he achieved a mark of 6 feet 9 and 1/4 inches. At the meet, Russell tied Charlie Dumas, who would later in the year win gold in the Melbourne Olympics for the United States, and became the first person to high jump 7 feet. Like fellow world-class high jumpers of the era, Russell did not use the Fosbury flop high jump technique with which all high jump records of 1978 have been set. Russell also competed in the 440-yard race, which he competed in 49.6 seconds. In the 1956 NBA draft, Boston Celtics coach Red Auerbach set his sights on Russell, thinking his defensive toughness and rebounding prowess were the missing pieces the Celtics needed. Boston's chances of getting Russell seemed slim because the Celtics finished second in the previous season and the worst teams had the highest draft picks. The Celtics had slipped too low in the draft order to pick Russell. In addition, Auerbach had already used his territorial pick to acquire talented forward Tom Heinsohn. Auerbach, however, knew that the Rochester Royals, who owned the first draft pick, already had a strong rebounder in Maurice Stokes, and were looking for an outside shooting guard and were unwilling to pay Russell the $25,000 signing bonus he requested. Celtics owner Walter A. Brown contacted Rochester owner Les Harrison and received an assurance that the Royals could not afford Russell and would instead draft Chihubu Green. Auerbach later claimed that Brown offered Harrison guaranteed performances in the Ice Capades, but they did not draft Russell. It is difficult to verify or disprove this, but it is clear that the Royals underrated Russell. The St. Louis Hawks, who owned the second pick, drafted Russell, but were vying for Celtics guard Ed McCauley, a six-time All-Star who had roots in St. Louis. Auerbach agreed to trade McCauley, who had previously asked to trade to St. Louis in order to be with his sixth son, if the Hawks gave up Russell. The owner of St. Louis called Auerbach later and demanded more in the trade. Not only did he want McCauley, who was the Celtics' premier player at that time, he wanted Cliff Hagan, who had been serving in the military for 3 years and had not yet played for the Celtics. After much debate, Auerbach agreed to give up Hagan, and the Hawks made the trade. During that same draft, Boston also drafted guard Casey Jones, Russell's former USF teammate. Thus, in one night, the Celtics managed to draft 3 future Hall of Famers, Bill Russell, Casey Jones, and Tom Heinsohn. The Russell draft day trade was later called one of the most important trades in the history of North American sports. Now, I really don't want to go further. Because all I'm going to be saying is won the title, won the title, won the title. So I'm just going to be vain. During Russell's first year, of course, they won the championship. All right? 1958, it took a 50-point performance by Bob Pettit to barely hold off the Boston Celtics from winning back-to-back. But from 1959 through 1966, the Boston Celtics won 8 consecutive NBA championships. All right? 8 consecutive. That streak ended in 1967 when Wilt Chamberlain, now with the Philadelphia 76ers, played on one of the all-time great teams, the 68-win 67 76ers. By 1968, the Boston Celtics were considered past their prime. But shockingly, in 1968, they won another championship, their 10th. But by 1969, they were considered like old, you know. Russell was 35. Sam Jones, I believe, was was Sam Jones. I think Sam was 34. They were old. Okay, they were older. I think they went 48 and 34 during the regular season, and they were rather inconsistent. A lot of times they looked their age, but they managed to get to the NBA Finals. And at one point, I think in the finals, they were down 2-0. I think it was 2-0 or 2 games to one of the two. But they were able to come back and force a game 7. But everybody anticipated that the Lakers were going to win that 7th game. And I remember reading that at the time, the owner of the Lakers at the time was Jack Kent Cooke, who also at the time was I think, the owner, or about to be the owner of the Redskins for some years. And they had already planned out, the celebration. They were going to drop balloons at the end of the game, and then champagne cooled, ready to be poured and served. And they already, and I think the Boston Celtics saw all of this, and that motivated them to play even harder. And this was not, by any means, an easy game for the Lakers. It was a back and forth affair. And inexplicably, in the fourth quarter, Wilt Chamberlain went out. I can't remember the exact minute mark, but he never came back in the game. Wilt Chamberlain, his coach, they did not get along with each other. I think it was Butch Van Betterkoff, I think his name was. Butch Van Betterkoff, whatever his name was. Wilt hated him. The feeling was mutual. And I think the coach was trying to prove that he could win without Wilt. Stupid. And ultimately, the Lakers lost, and Wilt was vilified. I mean, the press vilified. And the Celtics won their 11th championship in 13 years. And it was immediately after this game that Bill Russell really gave it to Wilt Chamberlain in the press, saying that Wilt didn't have the heart. That was what held him back from winning more titles, blah, 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 blah. And these two men who had been friends for so many years, this was the genesis of what led to their feud for decades. Now, this is 1969. I don't think they started talking to each other again until the 1990s. You know, and even when they were doing their interviews with like Ahmad Rashad or whatever, they still hadn't quite buried the buried the hatchet. But I think shortly before Wilt died, I think Bill Russell finally apologized for all that stuff. But when you look at Bill Russell's resume, I mean, you can't. It's a Hall of Fame resume. You know what I'm saying? Um, 11-time NBA champion, most ever for an active player. 5 league MVP awards. 12-time NBA All Star. 1963 All Star Game MVP. 3 times All NBA first team. 8 times All NBA second team. 1969 NBA All Defensive first team. And mind you, that was the first All Defensive team in the history of the league at that time. So he'd have been on many, many more of those. He'd probably been on a record amount of those had they had for his entire career. 4 times he led the NBA in rebounding. He's on the 25th anniversary team, the 35th and 50th anniversary teams. His number 6, he retired by the Boston Celtics. Twice he was an NCAA champion. Um, NCAA Tournament Most Outstanding Player, 1955. UPI College Player of the Year. 2 times Helms Player of the Year. 2 times Consensus First Team All-American. WCC Player of the Year, 1956. His number 6 retired with the San Francisco Dons. And he was, I forget to mention this, because I didn't really go into detail about it. I don't want the video to run too goddamn long. After Red Auerbach retired as a coach, I think it was after 1966, Bill Russell became player coach. So the championships of 68 to 69 came as Bill Russell was also the coach of the team. For his career, Russell scored 14,522 points, or average 15.1 points per game, grabbed 21,620 rebounds, or 22.5 rebounds per game, and dished out 4,100 assists, or 4.3 assists per game. His coaching career, he won 341 games, lost 290. I believe he also coached the Sonics and I think it's the Sacramento Kings, if I'm not mistaken. And he won Olympic gold in Melbourne in 1956. And of course, he's in the Hall of Fame. Number 5 all time. Let the booze ring out. How dare you disrespect Bill Russell? But at number 5, I got Bill Russell.